So in a breakout session, it's much more engaging if I can actually see some faces, if you don't mind. But don't feel obligated. I know everybody's bandwidth can't actually handle it. I'm Wanda Martin. I'm an associate professor at the College of Nursing, and my research area is in food safety and food security. Urban agriculture is what I study mostly these days. Erin, it's nice to see you. So I did my PhD in the University of Victoria, and so I've been quite involved with PHABC throughout the years, but I'm in Saskatchewan, I'm in Saskatoon, and I was the president of SPHA, the Saskatchewan Public Health Association, after I moved here. So I'm really excited to see everyone. So a quick show of hands, or there is, I think you should be able to like raise a hand. Did anybody look at the videos that I mentioned when I posted my video at climateatlas.ca? Not really? Great. Okay. I didn't think you necessarily would. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with sharing this video. So Climate Atlas has a number of videos, and when you go to this website, you can see the link there. And they have a number of them that are specifically on agriculture. So one of the things that really affected me when I moved here was the very different nature of big ag. And can everybody see, or let me know. So anybody just feel free to, yeah, you're okay, thanks Erin. I do like the visual thumbs up or something goes wrong, just interrupt me. I'm teaching online, so we're good with this. Big ag versus what agriculture is like in BC and what I was used to working with and thinking about. And my students very quickly hear when I talk about things about carbon tax and that sort of thing and the effect on farmers, they were very quick to correct me and to give me an education. So thank God for undergrad students. So let's first listen to Darren, and then I'll go in and talk to, so Darren Qualman is the person who authored the report for the NFU that I'm going to talk about further.
Sorry, I can't hear the video. I don't know if there's a way to fix that.
Okay, no, probably not.
When you share your screen, there's an option to click to share audio.
Okay.
You might have to reshare and then click there's a little option to say share audio.
Share computer sound.
There you go.
Optimize screen sharing for video clip. Thanks.
I'm now doing work with them on climate change in agriculture and just finishing up a book on civilizations and energy. Well, we're standing in front of our barn. It wasn't made for dairy cattle or cattle of any kind. It was built to house draft horses, so the pulling power for the farm. I guess the irony is it was finished in 1918, just at the time that horses were replaced by tractors. And we began a 100-year process, 100 years so far, of injecting more and more fossil fuels into agriculture. I'm certainly not trying to give the impression that farming is bad. Farming is the food production system that we have does a lot of things right. But like every part of our economy and society, over the last 100 years, it has been transformed into something that is highly fossil fuel dependent. Huge amounts of energy and material has to go into food production. And in the food system as a whole, it takes about 13.3 calories, mostly from fossil fuels, to make every calorie that we eat. Fertilizers like nitrogen are really a fossil fuel product. If you go to a nitrogen fertilizer factory, there's a big natural gas pipe coming in one side and a big hydrous ammonia nitrogen pipe coming out the other side. So we're really turning fossil fuels into fertilizer, into food, into people. And those inputs we're putting in are also very costly. If you look at net farm income, you see that gross revenue goes up very quickly, but net income kind of stays flat. And that's because the people that sell the inputs are taking more and more and more in the middle. If we could reduce input use, we would simultaneously reduce emissions, but we also have a really good chance of increasing net farm income. So the core of a solution, I think, is low input agriculture. Low input agriculture has the potential to be high net income and low emission.
Shut that up. So that is what the focus is going to be of my quick 10 minutes here. So let me give you a rundown and we will, are you seeing the slides?
No.
Okay, let's try that again. You seeing them now?
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
And are you seeing them now?
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay, so just to go over a few points here, the takeaway message really for today is that agriculture must increasingly remerge with nature and culture to create much more of an integrated, life-sustaining and community-sustaining agroecological model of human food provision, nutrition, and health. Reducing that farm input that Darren talked about increases the net farm income, which not only can help with the climate crisis, but also help with the farm crisis and the loss of the family farm. And just remembering that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. The report that we're going to talk about mostly today that Darren wrote for the National Farmers Union is really sort of lays it all out really quite well, and they're in a position where they can actually, speak to our politicians and so on to really help support farmers in a way that is meaningful. So the problem really is that with the human-induced climate change, we do have this destabilization of food production. Water shortages. So one of the problems is that we have both floods and drought within the same growing cycle as well. So the water shortages problem is compounded when we also have this massive rainfall. The human population growth, of course, we continually need to feed more people. Which growing more food isn't necessarily the answer, or certainly not the only answer to that, but reducing food waste would also help with the feeding all the people we're going to need to. There is a potential of economic instability that's going to ride along with all of this, and certainly with what we've experienced now, we can see that that's a very real problem going down the road. The ecosystem loss and species extinction is also a problem, and that this global temperature continues to rise even after we stop emitting. So no matter what we do now, we're still going to see the temperature increase, and that increase may actually speed up. And that in the prairies and in some parts of BC, we are expecting increases of 6.4 degrees Celsius this century. So if you really think about the meaning of that for drought areas, it's going to be very challenging. And in 2017, actually, here in southern Saskatchewan, experienced the driest July in 130 years of record keeping. So those are some of the really big problems that we're dealing with. The farmers are leading solutions. They do have a very intense and deep commitment to protecting the land, which I'm not sure people fully appreciate that. And one of the videos, if you have time to go into the Climate Atlas, and one of the videos there does talk about women's work as being that emotional labor when, if you know, the husband as farmer is experiencing the suffering of the land that he experiences, and how the woman is really trying to hold everything together. So there was some very interesting videos around that to take a look at, to get into that sort of, really get into those shoes of the farmer. Tilling and plowing less is beginning to happen with less machinery, and really focusing on carbon sequestering. Changing the way that farmers will raise and graze cattle. I know that there's a lot on cattle and thinking about what we're going to do about our meat consumption, but you have to really weigh that into the land as well. Installing alternative energy systems and retrofitting buildings. Not sure if you noticed on Darren's land, he has a huge solar array there. And there is a lot of space on farms to do wind and solar. So there's lots that we can continue to do in that area. Experimenting with the composting, methane capturing, digesters, and manure handling techniques. Farmers are starting to think about that, and then the high-tech monitoring and precision farming controls to really optimize that output. The report contains a lot of details, and it's really well researched. It's like 98 pages. It took me 2 days to really read, but it's worth getting into if you really want to think about some of the solutions. So rejecting maximizing exports, and Saskatchewan actually grows more lentils than they eat. We don't tend to eat lentils in Canada, and yet we're one of the major exporters of that. So there might be some need to really think about our exports, which are important, but what are we feeding ourselves? Diversify approaches and support organic, holistic, and agroecological production systems is going to be very important, and maximizing that natural sources of soil fertility. So if you don't have any land animals, you're not going to be able to do that. So this is why we actually need to have cows on land. Using cover crops, intercropping, and multi-cropping. Electric farm machinery, and maximizing on-farm renewable energy production, and along with that will come battery storage and so on. But that has another whole area to discuss and to think about, because that comes with problems as well. Reducing the food waste, minimizing over-processing of food is going to be particularly important, and to try to minimize that transportation distances. So we will be in a position where we don't need to import some fruits and vegetables, because if it's going to be warmer and longer growing seasons, we could actually produce more here. But only 7% of Saskatchewan's fruit and vegetable intake are produced in Saskatchewan. So we have quite a ways to go here to improve them. So the cow to me is really important and really controversial, because there's been some grumblings of things like a meat tax, and really trying to get people to become vegetarians at the very least, which I'm not sure is a great sell all the way around. But if we really manage cattle production well and have sustainable mixed farms, we can have healthy grasslands and ecosystems. And really, if you want to talk about methane production, we need to really focus on the oil and gas to make space for ruminants, in my view, and be interested to hear anybody's view on that. Carbon tax is a huge issue in this province, but what we really need to do is talk to farmers about how to apply this tax, and to make sure that they're at the table with to come up with the solutions that are really going to be meaningful for them, and how do we actually incentivize farmers to move to these low input and low emission approaches. So agroecology, hopefully a number of you know about agroecology, but that's really what we're talking about here. And the National Farmers Union has a great document where this diagram has come from. But the idea that really community is supported and the inputs are fewer and there's more payback for the community. And you probably can't see in the below, but it's really the things like seed saving, livestock that are bred on farm, input production on the farm, soil fertility, and varieties chosen to succeed. So the solutions for one area are not necessarily going to be the same for every area, and understanding that land to maximize those solutions. So the agroecology is based on the Via Campesinas Declaration and the International Forum of Agroecology. There are these 8 tenets of agroecology, and if you're interested in this, I'd really encourage you to get really familiar with these and understand what's going on. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the key implications for public health action. And yeah, in a nutshell. So first of all, that was a really quick run through. Do you have any questions? And ooh, I don't know how I'm going to quite manage questions, but you go ahead and just shout out, I guess, if you have questions.
So I'm wondering if you can speak a bit more to the role that like I'm thinking of a report that came out recently in BC talking about agro-industrial zones and the role of agricultural technology. I'm wondering if you could speak a bit to the relationship between agricultural technology and then climate adaptation and where you think that role is.
Yeah, so here, like we have at our university at Saskatchewan, we have a center for the Global Institute of Food Security, right? You think, whoa, Wanda's going to that university, right? You think it'd be a great set. But the technology, we have to be really careful with the technology piece, and that technology will save everything. Because while there may be some role for that, it tends to be at that institute particularly, they're Monsanto funded, and so they're looking more at how to technologically change the seed, or technologically, like they're working on the roots, or they're trying to enhance the plant versus thinking holistically. And but there are some really great technological advances around using drones to check your crops, and looking at the way things are being seeded and so on. So there, and maybe somebody else has something they'd want to contribute to that too. I'd say just everybody unmute yourself and go for it.
This is Colin Dring. I think what I can add to this is it's important to remember that much of modern agriculture is technological. So plant breeding itself is a technological function. And so I think we have to be clear about what we mean by technology, and particularly in this context, who controls technology. So Wanda, to speak to, I was from University of Guelph with also a Cargill and Monsanto embedded in those spaces. There's definitely some corporate control of those technologies, but that doesn't preclude that the technological innovations can't be supportive of sustainable or agroecological interventions. And so a lot of the plant breeding work being done in labs exploring alternate technologies, alternate innovations, I think are quite suitable for food security and for health promotion. We just rarely see them implemented because of that corporate control. So even the genetically engineered varieties with increased vitamins or increased yield or water resistance, those are beneficial technologies in a nutrition outcomes perspective, but it's very rare to see them get to market or to be mass proliferated in agricultural systems.
Right, and while I agree with you, I think the key point from the NFU's perspective is what does the farmer have to pay for those inputs, and
Exactly.
how, you know, if the company is going to be getting all of the, you know, the major benefits from that, then we're actually increasing the large scale farms that don't care about the land the way that the family farmer cares about the land. So commodifying is part of it.
And in that sense, I would say control then can go in two spaces. One is with nonprofit organizations, cooperative organizations, or with state-controlled entities. So we can create public markets for provision of seed. Farmers can go back to days where we encouraged and enabled the conditions for seed saving. A lot of the agroecological research looks into lowering nutrient management and nutrient inputs. So there's a lot of key research and work that has to be done. We just see major gaps in dissemination and scaling up, right? So as you know, like our extension services across Canada, I'm here in BC, our extension services are non-existent.
Yeah.
Both academically and at the state level.
Right.
Hello, I'd like to, whether you can, I don't know whether I need to do anything so that I'm showing up, but am I? All right, thank you. Because I've been involved in at least a part of this discussion for a long time, maybe from the 50s. I wanted to just make a comment because I grew up on a fruit and vegetable orchard. And so I'm part of I guess a farming family, and 2 generations before me also. My involvement has been as a dietitian over a long time. And so really trying to look at the implications of agriculture and nutrition. And I remember in the 70s when we had some major agriculture planning at the federal level, finding it very difficult as a representative from the Canadian Dietetic Association to have anyone listen about how important nutrition was to the planning for agriculture, because it really was about revenues and etc. So although that's somewhat changed, it hasn't really. So I think it's just like part of the understanding of the big picture for all of us, so that we don't get like you know, it's really easy to get very technical about food security and nutrition and that whole line. But unless we move up a level, and so I guess that's what I'm hearing is, if we move up a level and we think about the introductions that we just got from the Institute, we need to piece all these things together and try to understand how each of us with our perspectives can contribute to a solution. And it's pretty chaotic, isn't it, when it comes to food and agriculture and the health of the land and the health of the people, and you know, and how we're going to mix that all up and think globally as well. So I just want to say it's, you know, it seems to have been a lifelong issue of trying to move up and have everyone on a road together. So I'm hoping this breakout session will help us think through that too.
I think you're right, Susan. And I think what I've seen over and over. So my PhD was food safety and food security, and the lack of communication between those two groups. And when I'm here and I see policy and things that are being decided without having the farmers at the table, or if you see, if the Global Institute for Food Security don't even want to talk to those of us who do community food security, as if we're talking two different things. And I think that, so we've tried to sort of, like, how can we have all of these different types of voices at the table to come up with a new idea or a new approach that can help to move forward in what's going to be very challenging times. So again, like, that's where I think where you're saying, Colin, that the technology piece is important, the innovation, but we have to be very careful with and make sure we're talking, when we say innovation in these two different camps, we don't know, we're assuming that everyone's working from our own personal understanding of that term. So that's going to be the piece. Sarah, oh, go ahead, Colin.
Oh no, I was just sharing a bit about, so my doctoral dissertation is around planning for agriculture. I'm looking at the Lower Mainland with the BC context, and what you said is explicitly the question that I'm trying to answer, is how do we plan, in my case, how do we plan interventions for the agricultural sector given this diversity, and often forgetting that agriculture itself is not an outcome. And I press this because I think this goes to Susan's point. Agriculture itself gets us to our outcomes. So in this audience, in this sphere, we're talking about public health outcomes and the range of public health outcomes. And I was really pleased, I think it was 10, 15 years ago, when we were seeing a really strong interest from health practitioners in agricultural policy. And then it kind of disappeared. And I was like, what happened here? This is probably one of the spaces where we can get most push at the agricultural sector to look at a diversity of practice, to look about what does it mean to intervene in a sector instead of allowing the market and corporatization to dictate what agricultural products are being determined for agricultural outcomes. Because we have very specific social and environmental outcomes that we want to arise from our agricultural sector. And I agree, like, ideologically, we have these two camps. There's an ideological camp that wants to do agroecological for the purpose of ensuring our social environmental outcomes. And then we have another camp that wants to ensure that we maintain the commodification, the efficiency, and the economization of agriculture for an economic purpose, right? And I think that those two camps are ideological. And it's one thing that I'm frustrated as well, is how do we bring those two groups together? Because they don't want to talk. They're ideologically at a point where it's kind of like, it reminds me of American politics, right? Where it's anything the right says, the left says is awful. Anything the left says, the right says is awful. And that's where we're at right now.
Right. Yeah, very much. Sarah Langley, is your microphone working at all? Oh, you're on the, no, I can't unmute you. So Sarah had put in the chat, I don't know if anyone saw it, but doesn't know much about the legality of GMO seeds, but I've heard that one of the concerns is the inability to save seeds because of their patent. Is this true? And if so, what are your thoughts about this and GMO in general? So GMO is a very, very challenging conversation. And some seeds are bred to not be able to self-reproduce, so you can't save them because that's bred out of them. Yeah, my thoughts are, generally, it's probably not a good idea, but I wouldn't write anything totally off. Jocelyn, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a couple things, but I think the most meaningful would be to just spend a couple of minutes talking about that piece that obviously caused discomfort. And I think you think it might be like a hot topic, which is the cows and meat. And I think that's for good reason, because there's been a lot of debate about it. And I know you framed it as grumblings, and I know that there's like some really high authority, you know, like the Canadian Food Guide, there's the Atlantic Commission, there's really a lot of people talking about it. IPCC includes a whole section on animal agriculture. And I think, but then at the same time, you're showing a lot of deep care for where animals play a role in the circular, sustainable food system that we imagine, that we're trying to dare to imagine, right? And see how to do it differently. I want to see like these disconnects because there's one way of working with animals that has been very destructive, very exploitative. And that's kind of the way that we push animals through factories and produce them en masse. And we wouldn't have the same amount of meat produced in this country if we didn't do it that way. We wouldn't have the kind of levels of meat here. And if we did do it in a more sustainable way, it would necessitate, unless we got it from somewhere else, of course, a reduction in meat consumption. Not, you know, with no like decision of the morality of eating meat per se, but I think there is something to think about when we talk about the relationship with animals and how we treat them when we're working with them to, you know, so that they will become our food. And I think you're talking about it in a way that's a more, you know, a more thoughtful way to care about animals as part of this bigger system. So I just wanted to mention that clearly there are like significant impacts, you know, to the way that we have been producing animals en masse in this country. Mm-hmm. And of course we know that there are health consequences when we fill our plate with particularly red meat and ruminant meat. And also, of course, we're missing out on like a really large proportion of fruits and vegetables that hopefully can be more localized where it's ecologically suitable, right? So I think that's something to think about. I also think about decentralizing production, like, or I guess marketing and decentralizing our system, and what we might be able to accomplish there when you have systems that are diverse, like you're talking about, where they're producing a small, like you know, groups of animals, groups of different plants, and how that fits into agroecological systems thinking, and a food sovereignty perspective too. And I think that's a policy direction that we should consider. That would be a dramatic shift from what we're doing now.
Wow.
Lay that down there.
There's a lot there. There's a lot there. And we've got about 10 minutes, and I think we need to maybe, I don't know, Craig, if we want to look at those 3 to 5 main points from those notes, if that would be at all helpful to really, because I think like the other thing that Susan talked about was nutrition, and what does that mean? And then when we put, you know, add health equity into that, is our meat production going to be so high that if you look at First Nations people who are not able to access wild meat, but still are, you know, very much used to having a lot of meat, then what happens if our meat prices get too high to a group of people who are traditionally more likely to be marginalized? So there's so many different things there, and what are the 3 to 5 main points for public health action, I guess, of all of the things that we've been talking about? Who wants to shout out what they think is one of the main points?
I think one of the points, and this isn't focused on a specific subject, I think this is what I'm seeing in my own work with COVID. You know, for the first time, government, especially Ministry of Health, is talking about food insecurity. They would never allow us to kind of say that word before. And so I think one of the points is around the conversations between different sectors at different levels, and how do we kind of bring those together. And I think public health plays a really important role in that. As conveners, as people that aren't, you know, a lot of folks in public health aren't farmers, so we can kind of straddle that role as the convening body, bringing government to the table, bringing big ag, bringing small scale farmers and regional producers and all those different things, and trying to host those conversations. I think that's a really important piece that we're talking about moving forward in our food system.
Yeah, I think that's probably the number one of what we've been talking about. is public health can be that bridge between, because we're already a bridge between many different, and when people look at me and say, a nurse, what are you doing in urban agriculture? Right, it sort of is an opportunity for them to think differently about what public health does and who are the players. And then events like this, of course, help to, I don't know how many non-public health people might be here, but if you looked at who we all are around the table here, it's quite a diverse group. So that's one really good main point. Does anybody have another?
I was just going to say, I like the concept of public health being a convener, because we really do have a really rich, diverse background of perspectives and understanding. And I think we could help with the convening conversations that matter.
Yeah. Anyone else have a thought or question or comment?
I think the other thing is that agriculture, agriculture is just one of those arenas that has implications for everything that we're talking about in this institute over the next 2 days. And so it's just is broad. It's just, you know, it's about health, it's about land, it's about you name it. So it's a very important center of conversation. Like, certainly not the only one, because there are many, but it works for having dialogue that matters.
Right. So do you think then that if we focused on agriculture sort of first, then it could set a tone or a template for other areas like transportation or something, that here's a model, here's the diversity within this area of players, and other change conversations could happen if we could do it right in agriculture. Does that make sense?
I think it's one of, but not necessarily the first, but definitely one where modeling could help.
Right.
And I think agriculture is a really important entry point for engaging the general public, people across the board, especially right now with all this increased activity in food, people producing their own food. All the COVID linkages, so food security has become top of mind for a lot of people. So I think the health community could play a really important role of communicating how much agriculture is kind of one of those nexus sort of spaces where there's the interconnection with the health of the planet, the health of people. It's so interconnected. So I think there's a really strong role that the health community can play in engaging people in that conversation, educating people about how pivotal agriculture is for health of people and health of the planet.
Right.
So
perfect. I'm not sure what the rest of the country is like these days, but I did a scan in 2007, 2009, somewhere around there, of food security policies across the country as part of my PhD, because BC had food security as a core public health function, and community food security especially. So maybe this is an opportunity, COVID being an opportunity to bring that to the next level for the entire country, so that each province could really look at how public health can be playing a role in community food security and agriculture. So in my case, you know, I start to think about how are we going to, can we create a peri-urban farm belt that will feed Saskatoon and what would that look like, and what would it take to actually do that? And if public health can help to organize that, that would be one way to think about how we're going to feed individual cities.
I want to almost dissent a little bit on this. Like, it's really focused a lot on agriculture, and I really think one of the strengths of food, and especially just bringing, you know, your average person to the table, it's talking around like food being part of culture, being part of people coming together. I think agriculture plays a role in it, but I also think of like Indigenous food systems. And while many Indigenous communities do semi-agricultural practices and now agricultural practices, there's still all this hunting and harvesting, fishing, and gathering of food that I think needs to be played in there. And so I almost like kind of want to pivot a bit of the conversation around agriculture to focus a little bit more on like the culture we're building, the sovereignty that we're trying to build around food systems. I don't know how to phrase that into a point, but it's kind
well, I started working on urban foraging, and how do we actually help support, because we have is it 16%, I think, of people in Saskatoon are First Nations, and so we've done a study on how they're bringing country foods into the city, and so now we're starting to think about how can we work with the green belts within the city in order to have foraging practices that people who are in the city can also participate in, and really strengthen that piece. So yeah, that is the next phase of my work, Erin. So
I think also just to add to that is that, you know, we work with folks out here around Indigenous food sovereignty, and this concept of food, lands, and waters comes up a lot for us as coastal peoples. And so one thing that we often forget, and in particular in these conversations around agriculture, is that intact ecosystems is closely related to Indigenous food sovereignty and self-determination. So there can't be a separation of land and a different jurisdictional view of land, right? Because it doesn't operate within a city or a green belt or a regional perspective. Ecosystems and food systems themselves, like those generative foodways, are fundamentally different. And that's why agriculture has been so successful, both as a tool of dispossession, but also as a productive tool for food. So I just want to incorporate as well, because this goes back to, I think, the theme of this conference is that intact ecosystems. And as we move towards more agroecological agricultural systems, those are two things that I think have to be held as something that public health has a strong role to advocate for, because it's not really going to come from the agricultural sector, guaranteed.
right.
Yeah, and I would question it being written as other food systems when agriculture is part of like a big food system. And I think food sovereignty is like next level that we need to be thinking of. It's transformational, and it is that instead of food security, which tends to be kind of reformist, like let's fill the gaps versus let's change the system. I think both are important, but food security is embedded in the understanding of food sovereignty from like Livia Campesina's definition of food sovereignty.
That's great. So Sonia had a comment. It's important to make sure Indigenous voices, knowledge keepers, and FNHA are heard and included in discussions, and possibly wild harvesting and growing methods of Indigenous people also did wild farming, and that should be considered. So I think that's a really important part too, Sonia, and hope that your baby gives you a break at some point. We've got a baby here. I live in co-housing. We have a baby here, and we've got one due this week. So, yeah, I've been hearing a lot of babies cry lately.
There's maybe another concept that that this is also sort of from my past recollection rather than the sort of policy work that I think of right now. But I think it's relevant, and I remember as a family that we went to the Summerland Research Unit to learn what was new and what we needed to do to make sure that the land and the trees and the etc. Like, it was always a very exciting time for my father in particular, because he sort of led, my parents both worked, but we all did work on on the orchard. So many new things happened at that time. In the Okanagan, we were just getting water in some places, right? So there was a lot of new development. And I see, as we talk about Indigenous food sovereignty and look at farmers today, and the interest in thinking locally in very strong ways about food production and health and well-being, and I think that just the concept of a research unit or an institute or somewhere where we all could, and maybe this is the same about the multiple conversations, somewhere where we trust that we can go to look for information that matters to us, or a place that we gather to talk about it, or just because they're not different. They really are a emerging understanding of what's important for people's well-being and agriculture.
Yes. That's a good way to sort of pull it all together and pull it back. We're going to be sucked back into the main session. Yeah. There is also a leave room button. Make sure that you don't hit the leave the Zoom call. If that, I think she may have disabled that, hopefully. But yeah, so this has been really good.
We just need someone to volunteer now, Wanda, to present back the main points to the bigger group.
Right. So Susan, Aaron, Colin, you've all had a great voice, and I know Aaron and Colin, I believe you're presenting tomorrow, and I'm note taking for you.
Richard and I are.
Oh, great. So Colin, this is your opportunity if you want to. Would you like to, Colin, or no?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to, unless someone else really wants to.
I think, yeah, you're happy to do
So
that.
I'll be putting these in a bullet form for a PowerPoint presentation, Colin, and so I'll post that for you so you can, refer to it.
Great, thank you.
And it was really nice to hear everyone. Some I've seen before and some I haven't.
Thank you, Wanda. That was great.
Yeah, thanks, Wanda.
Nice to